Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Hello, welcome to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. I am your host, David Parra, and again with a very important subject as we try to do every week. The subject today is John McCain, a Latino perspective. I believe the whole country and our state particularly witnessed the death of John McCain and all the services that were provided, and they were just amazing. They were just unbelievable. I believe the whole country is still assimilating everything that happened. It seems like when somebody dies, that's when you basically start thinking about who that person was and all the impact that that person had on people and in the country. We will be talking about John McCain's life and his service. And we have two guests and a co-host with us. And I'm going to start with Tommy Espinosa. And you are the president and CEO of Raza Development Fund. And Tommy, I know you're a busy man. Thank you so much for making time to be with us. Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. It's the senator was a dear friend, so it means a lot to me. So
now, was that also a compadre, literally in the literal sense?
In the literal sense,
you know, I almost named this show John McCain, Tommy Espinosa's compadre. But it didn't fly, so we have
no.
It might have been good. You
know, the compadre, and he was a compadre. I baptized Jimmy.
It's not a small thing, to have one of the most influential senators in our history, in the present recent history, to be a Latino's compadre. So that's right. I'm sure you have a lot to share. And so if you're listening to us, stay with us, call your friends. We are also doing this show via Facebook Live at AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. So join us for the next 60 minutes. Now it's about 50. So again, welcome, Tommy.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
To my right is regular, is Frank Barrios. He's retired. If I remember right, Frank, you are an engineer by trade.
Correct.
And you are also you can pull the mic towards you. Okay. That's perfect. And we consider you a historian. You've done a series of issues on the history spectrum. Thank you and welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. And one of my many titles, engineer, historian, president of St. Vincent de Paul. I wear a lot of hats.
Right. And you're also a member of LULAC, and you help ARP a lot. So you're all over the place. And thank you so much for everything that you do in the community. And my friend and co-host of this show, even though he doesn't come too often, but he's still considered a co-host, Alex Juarez. He is the director of communications for ARP Arizona. Alex, thank you so much. I know I had to go to you to put this show together, and you did it. So thank you so much, and welcome to our show.
Thank you, David, and thank you for having me. And I am extremely thrilled to have Frank Barrios and have Tommy Espinosa here. These are gentlemen that knew Senator McCain very well. I had the fortune of knowing Senator McCain. My wife worked for him for 5 years in the Senate office.
That's great.
And I helped in the 2000 presidential campaign, and the Spanish spokesperson helped out with some of the interviews. So I was just a lucky man to have known Senator McCain, and we're very lucky to have Tommy and Frank Barrios. Frank, you're the historian. You know his life very well. So thank you.
Yeah, I would like to ask you in the course of the show, that not to be limited by my lack of knowledge of his life. So feel free to jump in, bring on the points that you feel need to be brought in that I may be missing. I mean, I have a whole bunch of an outline here on a PowerPoint that I usually do before a show. Right. But let's just have a conversation. Why don't we start with you, Tom? If you can just relate to us, all the Latinos that are listening to the show and non-Latinos, just kind of. Well, how do you feel? What's the experience like spending this many years with Senator McCain in different facets of life, be it just regular human things, and then the political. I mean, how's that experience? How was that experience for you?
You know, the experiences of a true compadre. I'll be honest with you. When we first met, obviously he was just a congressman. Well, not just. He was congressman. And he, of course, was taking a lot of hits back then. A carpetbagger. He had just come into the state. And, of course, he had a military background. But what was interesting about the senator is the first time we met is that once you got to spend a little bit of time with him, the energy level that he gave off, I mean, and down to earth. I mean, obviously there was times in our whole relationship where we had some heated words, because that's what compadres do, right?
Right.
But initially, when I first had dinner with him in Alexandria with C.A. Hallett, who introduced me to him, actually. C.A. used to be Mayor Hance's right-hand person here in Phoenix many years ago. And obviously, Cindy and ourselves, we had dinner. And I remember immediately he felt like you've known John for years, you know, and after I got a little bit of a sense of that I could ask him some fairly personal questions, I asked him, how did you manage to survive being in a prison of war camp? I mean, you know, he had heard all the stories about him being tortured and hurt and so on. So he looked at me and he goes, you know, everyone always asked me how I was treated. Well, obviously I was treated horribly. I mean, you know, they broke his arm, his legs, and stuff. So, well, first of all, he says, my faith in God, and second of all, my faith in my family, and my love for my family, and my faith in my country, that they were going to figure out a way to get me out of it. And then he shared a number of stories of how, you know, between all of them, all the prisoners of war that were there, they started to help each other out. They couldn't talk to each other because they would be punished. So they started their own system of tapping on the walls and tapping on and getting messages back and forth. And there was one story that Grant Woods told in his discussion about John, that John really held close to his heart. And he said there was one Christmas Christmas Eve, where they tied him up to a post, and of course they were torturing him, and they were going to leave him there overnight. And the guard who was taking care of him that evening loosened up all the constraints, so at least he wouldn't be in so much pain. And the next day, before they came to check on him, of course he went back and tightened everything up so it looked like he was in pain all night. But before he left with his foot, he put a cross on the ground. And, you know, John always took that as that the guy believed in Christ, you know, and believed in Jesus, and therefore he was doing that as a Christian. But he soon rubbed it away as soon as, you know. Right. John was full of these heart-wrenching stories, you know, that people didn't realize that the strong military guy that he always came across on the news had this big heart.
Do you think that that suffering shapes a person? And it so happens that in John McCain's case, it happened even before he became a politician.
Yes.
I assume that suffering, you know, you're grounded. You really know. And that has to affect the way you do politics, correct?
You know, I touched on that in my talk. In my sense of him was that God took that period of time to bring him to his knees.
I remember you said
you know,
that, yeah.
to the full point of humility.
Right.
And you can't do anything about it. You know, so if in fact you do have faith in God, then obviously you turn to that because that's all you got left.
Right.
But the other part of that, though, was his still not being bitter at the situation. And I mean, that takes a lot. I'm not sure I could do that, to be honest with you. I mean, so here's a guy who's getting tortured. He's getting beat up. He's being humiliated to the point where, you know, he came close to death. If that doesn't change you, I mean, I don't know what does.
Right.
And then to come out of that, a whole person from the standpoint of himself as an individual. And look, he went through some changes when he got out of there. I mean, there's no. He came out in his HBO program and said, "Look, he went through a divorce,
Right.
and which happens to many men who suffer through that. And of course, the process of trying to digest all that in your head when you're out. So it had some personal downfalls for him,
Right.
but he came out of that.
Right.
He was able to create in himself the strength of never giving up.
And that's, I think, one of the characteristics, I think, that comes out all the time is that in spite of every obstacle that he faced, he always went on. He always moved
Yes.
on, right? Yeah. If we can come to Frank just for a little bit. Frank, we're talking off the air, and this show is supposed to be John McCain's A Latino Perspective. Where is John in Latinos? I mean, you were relating to me, and it's okay to not go in order. It's
Right,
perfectly
right.
fine. You related to me the instances with President Obama when somebody was talking bad about him, and then with Congressman Grijalva, or just anything that is in your mind as far as Latinos and John McCain.
Sure. No, I think a very good comparison with John McCain is that he followed Barry Goldwater. And Barry Goldwater, there was a lot of similarities. They both were Republicans. Barry Goldwater loved Arizona, as did McCain. Yeah. And Barry Goldwater loved the diversity that's Arizona. Latino, Native Americans, Chinese, whatever. Both men had, and very outspoken. They told you the way they thought things were, and there was a lot of similarity. I think the big difference was the fact that it was a different Congress. When Barry Goldwater was there, I can actually say that whether you're Democrat or Republican, didn't matter. Arizona was what they were there to protect,
yes.
and they did everything and to be on behalf of Arizona. Today, there's a lot of ideology out there, and they follow a lot of ideology, partly because there are people that are coming from Arizona that are not from here. I think it's fair to say McCain adopted Arizona and the diversity of Arizona.
And vice versa.
Vice versa.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, one time I heard him give a speech in Casa Grande, and Grijalva and him were together. He sat there and praised Grijalva, and I can tell you that Democrat, Republican, there's no two. Grijalva was far to the left, but he sat there and said the good job Grijalva had done, and praised him for what he had done, and that's a character of the type of man he was, and he was a good person in a very difficult situation in Congress. How did he get reelected? There were times, I remember he was one of the few Republicans that led trying to get immigration reform. And it didn't pass. And then his election came up, and I'm afraid he kind of drifted to the right. But he did what he needed to stay there.
Right.
That's politics is not a fun game.
No.
It's a very difficult situation, and I think one of the things that not only did he try to do what was right, but he knew how to play the political game very well,
Right.
and he stayed there until his last breath.
Right.
And I think we all remember that one incident when Obamacare and he went up in front of everybody and put his thumbs down.
Right.
And that's John McCain.
Right.
And I
That'd be in
do
the
believe,
books.
just as Barry Goldwater, the Hispanic community, he loved them. Barry Goldwater, like I said, if you go to Post 41, he's a hero to them. And McCain, again, different situation, but I think McCain loved the diversity that's Arizona.
And if I understand this correctly, he basically replaced Barry Goldwater as a senator, correct?
Correct.
He basically was elected to take that seat that was left when Barry Goldwater left.
Yeah, let me a little short story on him. I'm glad Frank touched on immigration. I played a very small role, so I don't want to imply that I had a lot to do with this. But Raúl Izaguirre at the time, I was back in Washington with National Council de la Raza, NCLR, and Raúl said, we've got to get to Senator McCain. He says, he's your compadre. You set something up. So I asked him, well, what's the meeting for? And he goes, I'm trying to see if he'd entertain working with Kennedy to put together some legislation for immigration. So, and I reached out to the senator, and of course he met with Raúl. And of course that meeting went well, and that started the beginning of John really, and John was already open to this anyway, but I think the fact that he had the ability to get somebody with a stature of Senator Kennedy also to the table. So those two really came together and pushed that legislation, tried to push the legislation through, and of course it didn't come to fruition. The other is that I don't mind sharing with you. Look, when the senator didn't win the presidential, one of the first acts that he did, and people don't realize this, he reached out to Obama and said, look, whatever I can do to help as a senator from Arizona, I'm here to support you. He said, I only ask you for one thing. I want to work with you to get immigration reform now. Obama promised the Latino community across the whole country he was going to do that. He promised the senator. Ultimately, it didn't happen because Obama was focused on health care.
Right.
Immigration did not become his priority. And of course, John stopped dealing with him at a higher level after that because he lost confidence that the president was really going to move on that agenda.
Right.
So I think people don't realize all the stories behind the scene that Senator McCain would move on. And Frank's right. Look, in Arizona, if you don't win a primary, you don't get to run. So there was a period there where I didn't talk to him. I got pretty upset when I saw that commercial on the border with I forget the sheriff's name, who's also, so I don't even want to mention his name. But anyhow, so Elvira, my wife, kept telling me you should reach out to the senator. You should get over this. And I was like, you know what? I'm a Chicano activist, man. You know, if I want to keep some semblance of who I am, man, I don't want to talk to him for a while. Well, what happened is I get on a plane, and John didn't fly first class, right? He would fly, coach, commercial.
Right.
So I go up, and I'm about ready to sit down, and who's sitting behind me? Senator McCain. So he looks up at me, and he goes, "We need to talk."
Right.
What'd you tell him, Tom?
I said, "Yes, Senator." And we met, and of course, you can't be upset for too long at a compadre, right?
Right.
And I get it, but I like it or not, it really did have the heart of what I believe in and what I stood for, for our community. But right as soon as that happened, then he lined up the 8 senators. Yeah. So he never really backed off on the whole issue of immigration reform. And by the way, it wasn't just for Latinos too. I mean, you need to understand, when we used to have this discussion, of course, for me and the Mexican American, and obviously Mexicanos were a key issue for in my agenda, but he was worried about, as it relates to the global scene of how the U.S. is looked at on a global scene.
Right.
And he also understood that immigration and migration into our country was what made us so great. Because of all the different cultures and the different languages and so on. Obviously, the Republican Party didn't feel that they didn't embrace that, and that's pretty clear.
So that's why he gained the name of Maverick, right?
Of course.
Because he dared to stand for principle and address issues, even if the party was not embracing that issue.
And even on the vice presidential selection, whether we agreed that was a great choice or not is
You're talking about Sarah
immaterial.
Palin, right?
Sarah Palin,
Right.
He asked, and we had obviously some folks know this, but he asked me to speak for him at the Republican convention. So he asked us to meet with him in Las Vegas. So Elvira and myself went, and I kept reminding him every time he asked me to do something for him, real public, that I was a Democrat, that it wasn't really going to help him any.
Right.
But he was as smart as a fox. He knew that on the D side he needed some of those
Right.
votes too,
Yeah.
right? But anyhow, he asked Elvira on the way out of our meeting, "What do you think if I select a woman?" And of course, Elvira turned and said, I don't care if it's a man or a woman. If something were to happen to you as president, that person could run the country.
Right.
But once again, Senator goes and does something completely different. At that point, obviously it was a political strategy, but at the end of the day, he was willing to take those kinds of risks. Right. So anyhow.
Yeah. Alex, before, jump in.
I actually had a question, and I'm going to go back in time again because it's really interesting to talk about his character, who John McCain was. And not too many military or servicemen, and I never was a part of the military, so I can't speak to that. But most people that have been involved in Vietnam or World War II never talk about things. Senator McCain had a purpose, and he wanted to tell a story. I mean, obviously, these were very difficult times with communism, and he was fighting it. But when he got home, many people turned their backs against these soldiers, against McCain.
That's right.
Who was John McCain? What made him be like that?
Well, obviously he comes from a line of his grandfather and his father serving in the military. I mean, like it or not, I'll use the term, it was bred in him. I mean, he was part of that family culture. But if you look at the family culture, and this is really a Latino thing too, and maybe I should say a military thing. If you go through the military, my dad was a Marine. Fought in World War II, got wounded in Guam, Purple Heart, the whole works, right? There is a character in them that flows through the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force. One is this idea of, willing to sacrifice their lives for our country. So there's this love of country. There's a love of being able to have principles and values. So John had that.
Yes, we have to go on our short break. Stay with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection with the title of this show, John McCain. a Latino perspective. We have Tommy Espinosa, Alex Juarez, and Frank Barrios. We wanted to get some female guests. What was the name, Alex? Bettina Nava. She almost made it. If she listens to the show, we greet you, and hopefully at another time she can join. If we can talk a little bit about this couple weeks, actually it may even be more, as we got the news that John McCain was going to stop treatment. And actually, from the time that he got the announcement or made the announcement, he literally died the next day.
Right.
And there were lots of services done at the Capitol here locally, at church, and then in D.C. What is your sense of what all this did to the country? Do you believe it managed, all these activities and happenings managed to get into the kind of a collective consciousness in some way of the country?
Well, first of all, you almost have to put a base under John's the senator's passing. First of all, look, we've had the last 6 months of Latinos being the worst thing that's ever happened to the United States. You've had the Afro-American community attacked on the basis that, in effect, going back to the old days of discrimination. You've had a sense of the country going sideways as it relates to international affairs. I don't need to say who's caused that, but obviously, when you look at that, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of this, Senator McCain, the word gets out about his cancer. The word gets out that, he's close to death. He passes away. Think for a moment, if God was ever going to pick a time for a person like the stature and the hero of Senator John McCain, God picked the right time. We as a country and as Latinos, we needed this kind of I'll use a term, a break in the craziness that says, you know what, here's an individual of the stature, the hero, the person bigger than life as it related to immigration, as it related to many issues that relate to minority communities and to our state of Arizona. And then seeing Republicans and Democrats come together. Look, Senator McCain literally programmed his whole process of his funeral.
Amazing.
I got a call in February, for instance, that I was going to be part of the ceremony. He was planning it from the day he heard he had cancer. But what was important for the senator, and I think he accomplished it, we as a country are all these pieces. It's not one, and it's not one party. I mean, there he had Obama speaking on his behalf, and then he had Bush speaking on his behalf. I mean, here he had Vice President Biden speaking on his behalf. Larry Fitzgerald, the football, who happens to be Afro-American. It's not by mistake that he picks me, and he knows me well enough to know what I was going to hit on. So we needed that. I've heard more people walk up to me and say, you know what, you brought tears to me, but more importantly, I feel that we lost this person who cared about our country and cared about us. And these are Anglos, Afro-American, Latinos, I mean, everybody. I hope and I pray that it's going to light a fuse that we start rethinking what our country is going through. We're already a great country, to Megan's point, his daughter. We need to celebrate that in the Senator McCain. We as Latinos also need to celebrate the fact that we're almost the majority of the country. We're no longer this minority thing. In fact, I do not use minority in any presentation that I give on Latinos. And then you combine that with people of color. I'm sorry, but we are that now. This country is that.
Right.
So it's a moment for us to reflect on that, and also reflect on the love that this strong man, as a military man, could have as a human being to care about other people in a loving way.
Right. And Frank, I know politics is tricky. How is that feeling that was generated, which I thought it was amazing? I mean, many name him an American hero, and that's not a light term to name somebody.
No.
So how is that the feeling? How can it translate to the political realm? Because if we watch news on politics, it almost seems like it evaporates right away. So,
what Tommy just said, I concur with a lot, but I hate to be pessimistic, but boy, what's going on right now, if everybody came together to honor McCain, a man, an honorable person that tried to do the best thing in a tough environment. Just like when he was a prisoner of war, he probably thought he was going to die in the toughest environment of all, but he survived. And in politics, he went forward, tried to do some good things. Immigration's a good example, and even his last vote on health care. He always tried to do the right thing, but surrounded in an environment that made it very difficult. But he survived. He found a way to keep going. And I don't know. I don't know where we're going to go, but I just would give you a quick thought. In the 1930s in Germany, before Hitler took over and he was running for office, there were if you were a German and you considered yourself a good person, your choice was between the Nazi Party and the Communist Party. And today we've got Republicans and Democrats, this may not be popular, but with the extremists controlling both parties.
Correct.
And John McCain came in there and tried to do the right thing. And everything else they disagree in, whatever happened to right and wrong. And John knew what was right or wrong, and he tried to do what was right. And I give him a lot of credit for that in an environment that's extremely difficult. I hope that what Tommy said happens in the future, that somehow this will light a direction to do good things. But, I don't know how we got to where we're at. And things like immigration, it's not just immigration, but it falls to a hatred of the Hispanic community on one side.
That's true.
And John tried to make corrections, but it didn't happen. So we need more John McCains. There's no doubt, and maybe that will change. But too many times we're electing people that are in the extremes and send them to Washington and nothing changes. Anyway, that's my thought.
Yeah, if anything, I think as Americans, if there's something that we can learn from Senator McCain is bipartisan type of work, unity, love for our country, and more than anything, just forget about what's right for the party. It's what's right for the American people, what's right for the country. This is a man that gave everything for his country. Did he take sides once in a while? Yes, but that's politics. It's part of politics. But most of his life, he was a loyal and very focused, centered, moderate person. So in these elections that are coming up, we have a campaign that's called Be the Difference, Vote. We want to encourage people to learn more about what the candidates are talking about. We want to put candidates that are caring about the country, about the issues, in particular for AARP, issues that are like Medicare, Social Security, things that are important for the 50 plus community. So we want to encourage people to participate, go out there and vote. We're not going to tell you where to go vote or how to vote or who to vote for. We just want to give people the tools necessary to find out what the candidates are talking about, what are the issues that they're focusing in, and they can listen also to what AARP is saying about those issues of the 50 plus community. So we encourage people to do that. So if anything, we hope that more John McCains pop up and that we become a little bit more moderate.
And what came out as when he passed away, there's books and memoirs and things, and I have some quotes here that are just unbelievable. Let me see if I can make sense of my notes here. McCain warns his Senate colleagues against secluding ourselves into ideological ghettos. he called it, with increasing reliance on personalized news sources and like-minded communities. Quote, before I leave, I'd like to see our politics begin to return to the purposes and practices that distinguish our history from the history of other nations. He says, I would like to see us recover our sense that we are more alike than different. The world is a fine place and worth the fighting for, and I hate very much to leave it. He writes, I hate to leave it, but I don't have a complaint, not one. It's been quite a ride. I've known great passions, seen amazing wonders, fought in a war, and helped make a peace. I made a small place for myself in the story of American and the history of my times. So he definitely acknowledges very, very well what the state of the country is and what the issues are. And he's literally begging and he's literally betting on the good side of Americans. And no doubt, like Alex said, and all of you, we desperately need that kind of attitude and that kind of feeling in order for our politics and our democracy to work for the people and not create divisions and this and the other.
Well, I would like to echo what Frank just said. I don't think that we should get focused on parties as much as we need to focus on the individuals that are running for office. We also need to vote. You know, you can't sit on the sidelines and complain if you're not out there asking the questions of the candidates and forcing some discussion and then ultimately going out to vote. So I think there's an obligation on all of us that if in fact we want to move the country in the right direction, and which I think is in being inclusive of all individuals and all different ethnic groups, I think now is the time to start doing that. The other is that I think Latinos have I'll use the term moral obligation to come out and vote because our numbers are there. Now the question becomes, okay, what does that mean? I believe it means that you vote for individuals that reflect your sense of responsibility on what they do in our community. I don't necessarily believe anymore even that it has to be Latino. I obviously would prefer that, but at the end of the day, I want a candidate that's going to do the right job. And that's what we ought to be shooting for. And that's why people should come out to vote.
Thank you, Tommy. We have to go on our last break. Stay with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. The show today, John McCain, a Latino perspective. And before we conclude our conversation, I just want to run down to some aspects of John McCain's life. Born in 1936, he went to high school, graduated in 1954. He went to flight school in 1960. He joined service in Vietnam in 1961. He became a POW from 1969 to 1973. 1976, naval liaison to the Senate. In 1981, he married Cindy Hursley. That would be his second wife. And they moved to Phoenix, and he worked in his father-in-law's business. 1982, he became a representative, and then reelected in 1984. He supported the Reagan administration. 1986, he became a senator. He replaced Barry Goldwater. 1989, that's when he got involved in he was investigating with Frank Keating?
Charles Keating.
The Keating Five, accused of intervening with federal regulations on behalf of Charles H. Keating Jr., a prominent donor and chairman of the failed Lincoln Savings and Loans Association. He acknowledged that was poor judgment. 1992, he was reelected to the Senate, and again in 1998. 1999, the book Faith of My Fathers. He ran against George W. Bush, and he lost. 2001, he was instrumental in passing the soft money law, a broad overhaul of the campaign finance system. 2004, he supported George W. Bush bid for re-election after he ran against him. 2007, he supported sending more troops to Iraq. 2008, he ran and won for the presidential nomination and lost to Barack Obama. Too much of Obama's popularity, and then they also say that he chose probably the wrong running mate. That was also, which it was Sarah Palin. That might have hurt him. 2012, he supported the Mitt Romney-Paul Ryan ticket. 2016, he did not support Trump. He criticized him. He said, he fired up the crazies, he said. And then obviously Trump fired back, and that basically started not a good relationship with the current president, as we know. 2017, there was a surgery done to remove a blood clot from above the eye, and they eventually found the cancer. Then he was very instrumental in not passing the repeal of Obamacare. We all remember that one vote where he pointed his finger down and voted against the repeal. He did support President Trump's tax bill. 2018, then he expressed concerns about a memo release that would damage the intelligence community, and then from then on, as we know, the reality of his condition was manifested, and obviously the rest, I believe we are pretty clear what happened. So this was John McCain. He suffered a lot. He learned to embrace ideals of both parties. He stood for principle most of the times. We have to be fair that in politics you cannot always do it. So again, I think at the very least, he was an inspirational American. I think an example of someone that probably practiced democracy to a very, very good, positive degree that we can all learn from.
Correct.
I think we can at least say that, right, Tom?
No, you can say that and more. I think worldwide he was also respected for his positions, and that he could be trusted. I think the wake up call for all of us, though, is that it's time, especially on both ends. The elderly, like myself, we should be worried about the White House and the Congress trying to do away with a lot of the things that are important to keep our populations going, whether it's Medicare, whether it's health care, retirement programs, all those things. And then the other point that I'll make is the other extreme is we need to educate our children. They need to understand the values of having principled individuals like a Senator John McCain. We need those kinds of models. With all due respect to sports folks and to individuals that are playing rock bands and so on, we need to turn the clock to a point where we say, okay, you know what, there are some real value that we get out of religion, that we get out of some of the traditions of the Latino community, that we have traditions of this country that has kept us together. So I worry as much as Frank's comments. I don't think we should stick our heads in the sand, that we are under attack as a community. Latinos are under attack by President Trump in a way that is embarrassing to the country. I also believe that both parties give us lip service to Latinos, but they never come through, either the Republicans or Democrats. So I believe that unless we educate our children to understand principal values, learn to get a good education, and go out the families to vote, those that can, we're going to catch ourselves, my grandkids, having this discussion with somebody, in 20 years, which would be really a shame.
Right. Alex, you did say that you, if I got it right, was it you worked for the McCain campaign, I should say.
In 2000, yeah.
As a spokesperson for Latino communities?
For the Spanish spokesperson,
Spanish. And then your
media.
wife also worked.
She worked in the Senate.
In the Senate.
In the Senate for 5 years.
Any things that you would like to share in terms of what you saw, his, in the senator, his values, his openness to Latinos, anything that you remember?
This is something that my wife Nancy and I have talked about, the values that Senator McCain and his family have had, and she highly respects the senator. He was an amazing boss, an amazing person. Every time I had an opportunity to talk to him, he took the minutes to talk to, and he'll stop and talk to anyone. He doesn't care who you are, he'll just talk to you. During 2005 and 2007, I was chairman of the board for the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Had many conversations. Some of them were good. Some of them were probably not the way that we wanted the conversation to go. But one thing that we all have to thank the senator is that he was very fair, and even though he may have disagreed on some things, he let you expose the topic or whatever the you wanted to bring about. He would let you talk, and then he would probably tell you a rebuttal, and many times he would put you in place.
And that's one thing that I believe you said in your sharing the eulogy. And then, Frank, you also could speak to that. I think we spoke a little bit off the air. I mean, he was not, in Spanish we say monedita de oro, right?
No.
He had his character, and would you mind sharing just a little bit along those lines?
Well,
and then in spite of that, how we can basically still see him as a good model to follow.
Every human being, it always amazes me. We have millions of people in this world, and every individual has a different personality. And John had his personality, and he had a hot temper. When he thought he was right, he could. I remember many years ago, I went with a group from Yuma to ask all of our congressmen to fund wells in 1983. And the first thing one of the guys from Yuma told him, they said, it was Hoover Dam, the federal government, that caused our flooding. You guys need to pay for this. Oh, Lord, John went through the roof. And he says, I'm sick and tired. It was a fact of nature that occurred. This is not the federal government. Oh, he was really mad. But again, this was... he had his ideas of right or wrong. Right. And I think that's what we need to put into the kids, the next generation. And I always, as a historian of Latino history, I have to also tell you, too many young kids don't know the history of what the Latino community did in Arizona. They have a fantastic history, and the kids have to be proud of their heritage. They got to be proud of people like John McCain, who tried to do the right and wrong. And if you don't teach those facts, it's not going to be a very good future. So I really think we need to do more of that. Be proud of who you are. Be proud of those that stood for right and wrong, not politics, not winning. It's about what's right or wrong.
Right. If I may read another couple quotes here. 2 days after his death, McCain's office released a letter from the senator in which he implored Americans to come together one more time. Quote, "We weaken our greatness when we confuse our patriotism with tribal rivalries that have sown resentment and hatred and violence in all the corner of the globe," said the letter. "We weaken it when we hide behind walls rather than tear them down, when we doubt the power of our ideals rather than trust them to be the great force for change that have always been. Do not despair of our present difficulties, but believe always in the promise and greatness of America, because nothing is inevitable here." The letter continued, "Americans never quit. We never surrender. We never hide from history. We make history."
Right.
So those are amazing words, and it, like you, Tom, you said, it's amazing how he planned every aspect of his funeral and everything. I mean, I wish that we can all do that, right? And learn from it. How should we close, Tom? We have a minute. I understand that politics sometimes doesn't allow you to cross the party line in your feelings. You don't want to kind of acknowledge some things, but they're there. What would you say to the Latino community in terms?
Maybe a quick question, Tommy. Do you think that any of the McCains have aspirations, political aspirations?
Well, I would hope that Megan eventually, after she heals, possibly runs for some seat, and preferably a U.S. senator seat in the future. But you know what? My message to our community is our cultura teaches us to love and respect our elders, respect our familia, and to stick together and help each other. And by familia, it means the familia next door to you, the familia that's hurting next, the familia within your own. And we need to stay focused on that in order for us to do well in our country.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Frank. We've come to the end of our show. Thank you for being with us today. Join us next week. This was AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Have a great day.
La 1190 AM es más que una estación de radio.